everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the very first edition of Whiskey and Wine, presented by Onestà. I'm Will, here with my wife, Hannah.
Hello, I'm Hannah, here with my husband.
That'd be me. And guys, we have the real pleasure today of speaking with one of the leaders in the spirits industry. She really is incredibly innovative. Her name is Karen Hoskin, and she is the owner of Montanya. How do you pronounce it?
Montanya.
Montanya Distillers, based out of Crested Butte, Colorado. Karen, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you talking to us today.
It's great to be here. I always tell people, think of your friend from high school named Tanya, then you'll remember how to say Montanya.
That solves the problem immediately.
We've been saying it differently every time.
Yeah. No,
Spanish word mountain.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, no, I've been like making up word. Like I've been saying like Montanya, and Hannah's like, Will, not even close. There's no U.
I'm like, that's probably not how you
My
say
mind
it.
just can't comprehend. So my friend Tanya, Montanya, got it.
You got it.
So perfect. So Karen, I guess we'll just jump right into it if you don't mind. For those of you that don't know, Montanya is incredibly innovative in sustainability and their ethical practices, which is why we're speaking with Karen today. So if you wouldn't mind sort of giving us a little bit of overview about your background, why rum, why Colorado isn't rum supposed to be drank in the Caribbean, and sort of just give us a little bit of background.
Gosh, it's a many-layered story, so I don't know exactly where to start, but I'm going to start with what you said about rum in the Caribbean. So I went to Guatemala years ago, and I've been a rum fanatic for a really long time. Since my first taste of rum, of good rum, which was not in the Caribbean at all, but it was on a beach in India. And so I went to Guatemala and I learned about this incredibly esteemed tradition of rum from the mountains. And that was my aha moment that I was going to start a rum distillery in the mountains. Because I've been a rum fanatic for literally 32 years, long before craft rum and premium rum was even a conversation in the United States anywhere. I was literally the only person I knew that was like, I felt the way about rum that other people feel about whiskey or Cabernet Sauvignon or, Scotch, things like that. So that was my beginning, was on a beach in Goa, India. Had my first sip of really good, it's not my favorite now because my palate has come a long way, but my first sip of good aged rum, and I thought, what is this? And it led to a love affair with the spirit that eventually almost 13 years ago led me to start my own craft rum distillery, which you can imagine 13 years ago, I was the first woman that I knew and that I still know who was the founder of an American craft rum or just craft distillery back then. I would go to conferences and trade shows and things like that, and they just didn't even believe, they thought I was somebody's wife, basically. They were like, yeah. Where's your husband?
That's nuts.
So it's been quite a journey, especially being also one of the first really sustainability focused distilleries in America, and one of the first, maybe the first sustainability focused rum distillery in the world. It's been a lot of breaking down barriers, changing expectations, getting people to think differently. It's been quite fun.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's been awesome to read about you. I think I really want to jump in on the sustainability piece.
Wait. We forgot to tell people what we're drinking.
We're drinking a daiquiri with
Montanya.
Montanya, my goodness. With Montanya's very own rum. It's delicious, by the way.
It is very good.
Delicious. I've never had a daiquiri this good.
Yeah, me either.
But anyway, so jumping into the sustainability piece, which is one of the focuses of our company, which is precisely why we're talking to you today. Online, you talk about how your distillery is 100% wind run. Is that correct?
Yes, 100%. All of our energy comes from wind.
Wow. Okay. So explain it to me like I'm an 8-year-old. How do you go from okay, we want to be a wind run company to actually doing it?
It's a lot easier than people think, actually, because most people think in order to be 100% wind powered, they have to go outside and put a wind tower on their roof, and then it has to be windy. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's not windy, so I must not be gaining wind power. But in business and in commercial work, I found a partnership with a wind producer where I buy all my power from that wind producer, and they produce way more than I ever could need. And they are generating a lot of wind electricity in Colorado. They're an amazing company because they only produce sustainable sources of energy. So I couldn't partner with my local energy cooperative because they buy electricity that comes from coal and electricity that comes from natural gas, and some 20% of their electricity is from green sources, and that's not good enough for my standards.
So is it mostly wind, their whole company, or do they use other forms of green, like solar powered and stuff too?
They do it all. So they do hydro, they do solar, and they do wind, and they create a big pipeline of sustainable energy sources, trying to shift the balance so that more energy in the US is coming from green sources than from those older time to be retired power sources, power plant.
Now, I think sort of along those lines, I think a pushback that a lot of companies bring up when they talk about sustainable energy is that it's expensive. And I think the reality is there is a pretty big capital investment up front a lot of time with these sustainable sources. Have you found that it saves you money? Have you found that it actually is more expensive? It's just in line with your values, or sort of what from a cost point of view have you seen with the wind power?
I love it that you asked me that question, because I think it's one of the greatest myths in sustainability. For me, so everything has a lifespan cost. Most people think that sustainable energy is so expensive because it typically front loads the cost. But when you look at the lifespan cost of green energy, it's much, much less expensive than the cost of, all of the mining for oil and gas that is used in the generation of other types of electricity. That's a huge expense,
right,
but it's ongoing. We just have to look at the whole lifespan of the electricity differently. Same with solar power. You install solar panels and that has an upfront cost, but over the lifespan of those solar panels, which last, 10, 15, 20 years, your cost per kilowatt hour actually goes down. So I think that's a great myth, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, because I've heard other people sort of say the exact same thing, which I think is a good point that companies are realizing more and more now, which hopefully will lead to change in the future. It is interesting to see that from a cost perspective, it actually probably makes more sense to invest in these green choices.
Yeah, and so how long, like you say the lifespan, how long or short can that be for you to actually kind of like get your money's worth?
Break even?
Yeah.
So in terms of break even, it's going to vary from one power source to the next. So we're constantly counting upfront investment, payback time frame, but also sometimes you can sell power back to the grid. So it's kind of a complicated spreadsheet with lots of calculations. So I wouldn't be able to say the payback on sustainable energy is 5 years, right, because that wouldn't be fair to the complexity. But I can say that it's also nowadays much quicker than most people think. The cost of green energy has gone down, the infrastructure's gone down. The more green energy we have in the world, the more economical those systems become, because we're producing, as you know, anytime you produce more and more of something, the production cost goes down.
Right.
So that's my greatest mission, is to have more and more people using these types of energies, because the cost is going to go down and the break-even point is going to get earlier for all of us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
I guess another way you guys really aim to be sustainable is through this concept of zero waste. And you talk about it on your personal website, you talk about it on the company website. It's a concept that fascinates me. And I'm curious, sort of, when you say zero waste, but you're a company that works in a supply chain where you have many suppliers, where you have customers that, aren't following the exact same guidelines that you are and are probably producing waste. How do you define zero waste within your own company? And then how do you work towards a goal when maybe not all of your stakeholders are aligned on the same goal, if that makes sense?
It's a large question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot, and it's something I've had to make some very difficult business decisions based on. So what we've done as a company is we've looked at every single input and every single output from start to finish. So I also have a bar and a restaurant that has about 100 seats, and let me tell you, the restaurant business is the hardest to wrangle when it comes to waste. Right now in COVID, we're allowed to do to-go cocktails. Most of our colleagues in the business are doing to-go cocktails in plastic cups with plastic tops, and potentially, a plastic straw that they tape onto the side. And we couldn't do that for a couple of reasons. One is we don't use plastic to whatever extent we possibly can. And then the second problem is, even if it's compostable, the closest commercial composting facility that can compost one of those green stripe cups is 230 miles away. So we have to ask these questions of every single thing we do. We live in a community where you can't recycle plastic film, which is like your bread bag and your grocery bag, if you happen to still use grocery bags that are plastic. And so we had to come up with a whole solution with the company Trex, where we privately recycle all of our plastic film, and it goes to the company Trex to be made into Trex decking. But that's cool, though. That system didn't exist for us. We had to create it by assessing first that we have a problem with plastic film. Like a lot of our empty bottles and cartons show up on these pallets wrapped in plastic. We can't get those people to not do that.
Right.
We tried. So I could go on for days about every little piece of the process that we've assessed and how we've made it either zero waste or green or as close as we can get. But we had to give up our commitment. We were trying in 2020 to become zero waste by the end of the year. It was not possible given COVID, given everything that we were contending with as a company, given that we're in a rural area. So we had to really come up with some even more creative solutions, like becoming plastic neutral certified, which I can also talk about.
Yeah. And that was one of the things too that we actually really appreciate, how you kind of you admit that you didn't reach your goal of zero waste, and it was hard for all these reasons. Because one thing we want to, one of our goals for our company is to be very transparent with all of our customers and say, these are our goals and this is what we're currently doing. This is how we're trying to get better, but it's not always going to happen the way that you want it to. So, and as with COVID and stuff, I'm sure that, it's difficult for a lot of companies, but especially in your industry, to have zero waste.
Yeah.
I wish someone had come up with a better term, because I bet even the people who say they're zero waste are not.
Yeah.
They're just tolerating a certain plus or minus 2%, 5%. And so zero becomes a really poor descriptor. I would rather that we say, that we get really specific. So we say carbon neutral, we say plastic neutral, we say, paper neutral. So we're taking out more carbon than we're putting in. We're taking out more plastic than we're putting in. And you could do that really quite well for almost every piece of your waste stream. But yeah, it's an imperfect science, and anybody tells you that they're perfectly zero is probably telling you a tale.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's why when we were looking at your website and we saw the whole zero waste goal, and then right after that, I think you guys have an article that you wrote that was like, it was impossible. Here's what we did. And it was tough. And I think that, like Hannah was saying, that transparency, I think, is huge. And like you were saying, these people that are claiming certain things frequently, are, within a percentage or within an accepted amount. And so sometimes customers or just stakeholders in general kind of led the wrong direction. And I think that we both saw that article that you guys wrote and we're like, wow, they're really committed to being honest, but also still trying to take those incremental steps in the right direction. I think it was in your website as well. You mentioned just taking steps. As long as you're moving in the right direction, you're doing what you can. And I think that's part of what we are trying to live through right now. The reality is we're broke college kids. We can't afford to shop at Whole Foods every day. We can't afford to buy a Tesla. So we're looking, hey, where can we make decisions that are in the right direction? And I think that seeing you guys do that is really encouraging. I hope more companies follow in your footsteps and sort of try to adopt that model.
It's been interesting. I did a tour not too long ago at a distillery, and we were talking, and they have a very strong sustainability message online, and really, they come up a lot in conversation about sustainable distilleries. And so, of course, I was like, tell me what you're up to. And they had a beehive on their roof. And they had a place where they did some heat to heat exchange between hot water and cold water to heat some hot water. And I was like, okay, so what about your bottles and your labels and your energy? Where does your energy come from? And, I asked a lot of questions and they were like, yeah, we don't do any of that. And I was like, rationally, it would be better than saying we are a super sustainable distillery to say, here are the things we do to be toward being a sustainable distillery, because then other people can assess and say if that's enough for them. So I'm on panels a lot. Well, I used to be before COVID, in Miami or just nationally or in London, talking about sustainability in the industry. And, I'm often on a panel with another company who they're saying that they have a really sustainable approach, but really they got shut down 2 years ago by the EPA for like pumping effluent into the ocean. And now they've had to, in order to correct their PR disaster, come up with a much better story, so I think it's really our customers they have a trained eye. And I would like to give them the information so they can decide how sustainable we are and if we're sustainable enough.
Yeah, and then you say you use the terms plastic neutral, carbon neutral. Can you explain a little bit more about that and like what exactly you do to be plastic neutral?
Sure. We use the products of our creation of our main ingredient to fire the boilers and to create all the electricity for the milling process of our main ingredient. That's one thing. The second thing is that we fire our stills with natural gas. That's a carbon producer. So I can't go up in the sky and pull out that carbon. I don't have the technology. I'm too small. That would be a deal killer. So we've partnered with a company called TerraPass. They work with this incredible community forest in California called the Arcata Community Forest. This forest removes from the atmosphere some insane number of more carbon than any other forest. So I live in Crested Butte, Colorado. There's forest everywhere. This forest is designed to pull more carbon out of the atmosphere. So we make sure that this forest is healthy. We pay toward the people who work in that forest who keep it healthy, so that they are pulling out the carbon that we release. Same with plastic. So we went through a really detailed, long process of counting up exactly how much plastic we generate that we can't be sure is getting recycled. That came out to something like, 1,700 pounds a year. It's a lot, but not a lot compared to most companies.
Right.
And we we work with a nonprofit organization in India that is removing colossal amounts of plastic from the ocean, off the beaches, out of rivers in India. So for that 1,700 pounds, we're working with, because I speak Hindi, I lived in India for a long time. I have a personal connection to India. So I like knowing that what we're doing is creating a neutral status for us. So we're pulling ideally more out than we're putting into the system.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a super cool concept.
Yeah.
And is it like a non-science person? It just blows my mind. I don't know how people calculate what you're pulling out, but hey, I'm glad there are smarter people out there to figure it out. But anyway, I think we wanted to transition into a little bit of the ethical side of things, if that's all right. Ethics, obviously a very broad term, but I think we wanted to focus on like the women in your company. I know you guys have made that a focus. Do you want to ask?
Yeah, you're clearly a very strong woman who started a job in this field that didn't have any women really as the founders. And even looking on your website, like seems like a lot of your employees and stuff are also women. And so, yeah, kind of how do you promote gender equality, and how do you really, like, I don't know, empower all your women?
Yeah, it's been an ongoing journey, to be quite honest. So the first way that I did it was my first hire. The first person I hired almost 13 years ago was a female distiller. That was also rare. So it was rare for me to be an owner and distiller. And then it was also rare for me to hire someone who was female. And so then I trained her up. And then since then, I have trained 5 women. Now, actually, I just hired a 6th distiller. They're not all here at once, but over the last 13 years, we have our 6th female distiller in the company. And all of them have been trained by me, essentially, to do this work. And then they go out into the world with a set of skills that even if they don't stay in Crested Butte or they don't stay with Montanya, they bring to their next job a set of skills. So that's been important to me. But also, it's really hard to stand up in front of an audience. Like I stood up in front of 1,500 people at the American Distilling Institute conference. And I just said, hey, I just want to ask you to do one exercise for me right now. Just look around this room. Just take a second and look around the room. There were 1,500 people in the room, and probably 7% of them were women. And of that 7%, probably 3% of those were people who work for label companies or cork companies, or they're salespeople for, the suppliers to the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said, this is an issue. And if we can't talk about it, and if we shove it under the rug, we're not going to see any change. And the way that we make change to that is we become visible as women who are working in the industry. And then we show that we are just as confident and capable and competent as anybody else working in the industry. And then then slowly other people look from the outside in and they say, hey, I could do that. Like, I could be one of those distillers. I could own a company. I could start a company. Mm-hmm. And then it just snowballs. So since I started doing that work more than a decade ago, I would say we're now up to like 10% in the room.
Well, there you go.
Which still baffles me, but
and do you find you face like any type of discrimination, or people kind of stereotyping, like, oh, you're a woman and you might not know how
you must make rosé or something,
right? Like, do you get a lot of that, or is it just kind of based on the numbers of men versus women?
No, I have contended with some things that would curl your toes. So I was in a position to try to capitalize a company. Most of my male colleagues were like raking in investments from venture companies, of $20 million, or, just the doctor who had some money who wanted to invest. They weren't investing in a female-owned company. It was just anathema to them. They didn't understand, like it wasn't familiar.
Uh-huh.
And so I struggled so hard for the first decade of Montanya to be capitalized in a way that would handle my growth.
Mhm.
And then I attracted venture capital because a very significant company in the alcohol beverage world looked around and was like, ooh, there's a problem here. Let's do what we can to address the problem. So they created a fund, a venture capital fund called the Female Founders Fund. And I was one of the first distilleries in America to receive venture capital from the Constellation Female Founders Fund, which was, it's awesome, but it's probably still only 10% of their venture fund in general.
Right.
So it's, I'm so grateful that they've done what they've done. But that's been a big hard piece that people don't often think about, is just raising capital to grow, which every company contends with. But also, I walked in to make a presentation to some people about investing, and there were like 17 of them around a table. No question just by demographics, 17 people around a table of an investment company was going to be mostly men over the age of 60.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, oh, excellent. And I was like, okay, you're psyched that I'm here? And they were like, yes, and it took me a little while to realize that they thought I had brought their lunch. So,
Karen, I would have gotten in a fight if that happened. I don't know how you restrain yourself there.
Did you come
I was
in
like, what? Do I look like a caterer? I had a lace shirt on. I was like, I don't know. Do I look like the catering company? But
oh my God. That is crazy. Well, from our perspective, you're like a grade A badass for just like coming into an industry and just dominating. Like you guys have done so well.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, that's serious adversity. And like, I mean, I've been in rooms where people weren't like me, or, it wasn't set up for me, and it's intimidating and it's scary. And so like, kudos, like seriously badass.
Yeah. I would have liked to see the look on their faces when they realized you were there to give your presentation.
Yeah, really.
They were a little mortified. Here's the other reality. If I go to work in a market like Los Angeles to talk to people about Montanya rum, my male colleagues can be out and in the marketplace and in bars, obviously before COVID, until 10 p.m. until like 2 a.m. And for me, by 10 p.m., I'm just like, I got to get out of here because I'm a woman and I'm by myself, and this is not, it's not a good environment. I'm no longer perceived by anybody here as a professional. Yeah. So I often say that, what I have accomplished, I've had to do in half the time as well. So half the resources or less, it's 2% of the resources and half the time to get to the same point.
That's why they say women can do anything men can do better.
Hey, I don't disagree.
Well, but it's the truth is that the best environment is one in which we are collaborating super closely to make the best of all of our capabilities. So, and those capabilities just don't run along gender lines. I think we all as individuals have the capacity to do incredible things, but we're not going to do everything well. And so learning our strengths so that we can supplement our strengths with people who can fill our gaps. That's key. And that's true with people of color, people of different, diverse backgrounds, indigenous. Like I have had over the last year, I've had 4 people of different ethnicities. So 2 Kurdish refugees working for me, and I've had 2 Alaskan natives working for me. And I wouldn't trade a diverse work environment for $1 million.
Yeah. I mean, we both come from an area that's super diverse. I know this is a totally different industry than what we're talking about, but I think the point's the same. We were surrounded by so many different people, and just having those different ideas, different backgrounds, different accents, different colors, different everything, it just exposes you to what the world actually is. And it gives you an understanding for, kind of like you were saying, like we can all be collaborative together. And that's actually what makes you the most successful, what allows for the most growth. whether you're talking about school or you're talking about business.
Because you can mix all of your good ideas into one.
Right. Why limit? Why limit yourself, and why limit an organization?
Yeah.
So I, commend you for your sort of leadership in taking on the diverse work environment within Montanya.
I think it's just something I've set my mind to a long time ago, that yes, diversity is important to me, but not just as a number. That once we create diversity, then we have to create inclusion in decision making and management and promotion. And then once we create inclusion, we have to advocate for justice. When there is injustice in the world, we have to be perceived and understood by our coworkers as having their back. So, it's like, it gets complicated, but it goes really deep at Montanya, especially given that we are not surrounded by diverse other communities and diverse businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. Checking the box isn't enough. You got to go beyond that. I actually wanted to go back to a point you made earlier about Constellation, because I saw that they had an investment in the past, 2 years or so ago, in you all. And I'm curious, when you get an investment from a major company like that, how do you stick to your guns? How do you not sort of get pulled into what that company's values are? How do you stick to Montanya's specific values and not get sort of pulled into that profit-driven mindset of those bigger companies? I'm not sure Constellation is like that, but.
Well, I mean, Constellation, that's why I said yes to them, is because we share a value set. Not 100%, but in the group in which I interact most of the time, we share a set of values. I also had to understand that they came to me, they invested in my company because they want to understand my value set. I think they understand that it's the wave of the future, and that a lot of the ways that they've been doing business for 50 years is going to slowly become a thing of the past. So they're looking, that was very clear, they're looking to me for leadership on how to do this work with an eye toward sustainability and social responsibility and philanthropy and all that stuff. So that was pretty cool. The second thing is, it really depends on how you structure the investment relationship. So I maintained a primary ownership of my company. I'm the president of the board. I'm the CEO. So I did not give up control for that relationship. And there may be some point for companies at which they give up control and they choose to do that. And you may never totally understand the reasons why that's good for the company or why that contributes to growth. I think it can be really good. So an example might be like Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's is one of the most socially responsible, socially conscious, vocally justice-focused brands in the world, probably. And they're owned by Unilever, which is this like massive corporate entity that probably doesn't share all their values, but they've managed, even as those founders left the company, they managed to keep those values alive because it's baked into the company. And that's my goal, is to bake into Montanya all of the principles and concepts that I feel most committed to. And then it will be harder for anyone who is involved later to extract those back out without alienating the fan base.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's super cool that Constellation sort of committed to the same, is it going the same direction that you all are? Because I think a lot of times people take outside money and then realize, crap, now I'm sort of, I'm doing the bidding of this other company. And so I think that's A, super cool that they're aligned with you guys, and B, smart on your end for waiting for that money from the right person. I think that's key.
Yeah. Have you had like a lot of other companies whose values maybe don't align with yours try to have a partnership with you that you've had to kind of be like, no?
I wouldn't say a lot, but I would say definitely that has come up. So I chose not to have some conversations with some companies who didn't do this work the way that I would ever feel comfortable about the work being done. Mm-hmm. Constellation has learned a lot through trial by fire. So they've had some issues in the past with some companies and some transactions and some brands. They learned a lot. And so I think they've come to recognize that like they could maximize just profits at the expense of people or at the expense of planet. And that would come back to haunt them in 1,000 ways financially later. So figuring out how to merge in those philosophies is going to actually be better for their longevity as an owner of brands. And they own hundreds of brands.
Right. Yeah, no, they're huge. And it's cool to see the big guys starting to realize what I think a lot of the little guys have known. Little guys is wrong. You guys aren't little, obviously. So I guess we don't have too much time left. We don't want to take too much of your time, but something that we want to ask everyone that we interview is directly related to ethics and sustainability. This conversation's kind of been in that direction anyway, but as we've sort of tried to shape our company, we've come to realize when you say sustainability and ethics, you can mean anything. You know, there are these massive buckets, and people oftentimes pick and choose when to say they're sustainable, when to say they're ethical. And so I'm curious, at Montanya, with your other endeavors, how do you define sustainability and ethical actions for yourself and for your businesses? Sort of what do you try to focus on mostly? And maybe why is that? That's kind of a broad question, so I apologize.
No, but it really leads into something that I said earlier, which is that we are a certified B Corp. So the B Corp to me has created the ultimate basket that would only hold companies that are truly sustainable and socially responsible. And so then when I say I'm sustainable, you don't have to wonder, like, well, what does that mean to you? We were the first rum distillery ever certified as a B Corp, and only the third distillery in the world ever certified. So,
wow,
you know, it's a big process, but I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and a lot of lip service out there with people saying what they do and don't do, and they didn't ask all the right questions.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, having that to hang your hat on is kind of answers all the questions, really, that anyone could bring up. But do you have any final asks?
I don't know. I feel like I could ask so many things.
I know. I actually do have one final question. Does the guy named Cody still work at your company on your website? Is his last name really sexy?
It is.
That is the coolest last name I've ever heard in my life. We were looking at the directory and I was like, I have to bring this up. But I think that the only issue is if your name's Cody Sexy, you set the bar a little bit high. So when you walk in a room, I'd much rather be like Cody Average Joe, you know? Yeah.
I think he feels that way too. He's like, oh crap, now I have to like live up to this, you know, moniker of mine.
I would almost like add an accent and be like, no, it's pronounced like, I don't know, sexy or something. But
well, that's what we wondered that when we hired him a while ago. It was like, are we saying it right? He's like, yeah, you're saying it exactly right.
And does he get like a lot of mispronunciations, or like I feel like people
like
purposefully like not say?
Yeah. No, I think it's people know exactly what to say because it's SEXE.
Yeah.
You know,
very phonetic.
Yep.
Well, I love the name. I had to bring that up. But yeah, I think that's all we have for you. Seriously, Karen, we could not thank you enough for chatting with us, for teaching us how to make this drink, and for just really giving us an inside look into your company and the spirit space in general.
Yeah.
Well, good luck to you guys. I always like to give back to the system of startups and new people. It's not an easy thing to be in business. My son, who is 22, just started his own company, and it's all about sustainable and socially responsible investing. It's called Hoskin Capital,
awesome.
hoskincapital.com. But I have a lot of awareness of, you know, what you guys are trying to do and how hard it is and how hard it will be. So good luck. And if I can help you, let me know.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. Seriously appreciate your time. And lucky you can probably drink again once it turns to 5 p.m.
Yes. Well, it's still only 4:30, but ta-da, I have a daiquiri.
Early start.
I'd like to teach you how to make one.
All right, Karen. Well, thank you again. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
All right. Take care.
See ya.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.